justifying the killing, saying the federal agent was seriously injured. The Chicago Sun-Times has brought to light that the injuries were, in the agent's own words, nothing major. A man is dead. A community is shaken up. And we are yet again left with more questions than answers. On Saturday, federal agents wreaked havoc on the village of Broadview, a small suburb west of Chicago with 8,000 residents. I want to recognize Broadview Mayor Katrina Thompson, who is here today, and thank her for her strong and vocal leadership on behalf of her community. I also want to thank Broadview's police chief, Thomas Mills, for his steady leadership and partnership with state and surrounding local law enforcement. In Broadview, people nonviolently holding signs and chanting against brutality, expressing their First Amendment rights, have been regularly attacked with chemical agents like tear gas, pepper spray, rubber bullets, and flashbangs. Agents reportedly unholstered their guns and pointed them at protesters. In their own words,
On a pu suivre déclaration gouverneur Chicago, gouverneur Illinois, non? Monsieur Pritzker, qui lui-même a parlé de incident qui arrivait dans la cour Chicago dans le cadre de déploiement garde nationale ensemble avec militaires.
Respondent had chemical munitions fired at her car where there were no protesters in sight. And we have received many reports of U.S. citizens being detained for simply stepping onto the public street. That brings us to yesterday. On a beautiful weekend, when families were out enjoying their day in Chicago, armed Border Patrol agents were downtown marching up and down Michigan Avenue, harassing and intimidating residents and tourists. In Millennium Park, federal agents interrogated a family as their small daughter held onto her doll and appeared to try to translate for her parents. Officers carried large, unholstered, offensive weapons downtown, dressed in camouflage and masks. Building tradesmen near Tribune Tower, simply doing their jobs, were detained by federal agents while working on a construction site. Separately, 24 federal agents chased down a man, handcuffed him, and asked him for his papers. Meanwhile, ICE's chief offender, Gregory Bovino, has been leading the disruption and causing mayhem while he gleefully poses for photo ops and TikTok videos. Bovino even admitted on the record that they are making arrests based on how you look. Based on how you look. How you look. That's the baseline. They're not targeting violent criminals or gang members. They're arresting tamale vendors and delivery men and shaking down families. Donald Trump and Kristi Noem and Tom Homan said they were targeting the worst of the worst criminals. They lied, and they continue to lie. 60% of the individuals that ICE has taken in Illinois this year have no criminal convictions of any kind. ICE is running around the loop harassing people for not being white. Just a year ago, that was illegal in the United States. Now, ICE is making it commonplace. That's not making America great. In any other country, if federal agents fired upon journalists and protesters when unprovoked, what would we call it? If federal agents marched down busy streets, harassing civilians and demanding their papers, what would we say? I don't think we'd have any trouble calling it what it is: authoritarianism. So let's not pretend it's something else when it happens in our American cities. The MAGA Republican-supported invasion of Portland and Chicago and LA and Washington, D.C. is not making us any safer. Instead, it is putting our people in danger. This is an attack on neighborhoods, on lawful residents, on U.S. citizens. That's not preventing crime, as Donald Trump claims. That's threatening public safety. But as I've said many times, for Donald Trump and the MAGAs in Congress, this is not about fighting crime or about public safety. This is about sowing fear and intimidation and division among Americans. It was about creating a pretext to send armed military troops into our communities. This is about consolidating power in Donald Trump's hands. What he plans to do with that power, now or during the 2026 elections, should worry all of us. When you add to that the Trump administration's effort to label as dangerous free speech critical of him, White House senior staff calling the Democratic Party fascist, the Trump-appointed FCC chair threatening to revoke broadcast licenses and the approval of a merger in order to silence late-night comedians, Trump's threats to jail political opponents. You cannot call this anything except an attack on the Constitution of the United States. But let's also talk about what he's doing to the economy with all these attacks on our communities. Our small businesses suffer when our residents and visitors who are shopping and eating are made to feel unsafe by the jackbooted thugs roaming around a peaceful downtown. Parents are now scared to send their kids to school for fear the troops will grab their children. Students are afraid they'll come home and find their parents have been disappeared by ICE. This is no way to live. We are here together today, elected officials, business leaders, the faith community, law enforcement, educators, community organizations, united in our opposition to these flagrant abuses of power by the federal government. With one voice, we are telling this unwarranted and unconstitutional occupation by ICE and potentially by military troops to get out of Chicago. You are not helping us. Over the past month, I've been all across the city and all across the region, from Bronzeville to Austin to Pilsen to Little Village, talking to residents and to local business owners. Not one of them has asked for armed military troops in our streets. They have all said loudly that there is no emergency here on the ground that requires the deployment of military troops or the use of military tactics. I refuse to stay silent about this and let the slow encroachment of our freedoms and liberties continue unabated. The state of Illinois and all of us will continue to fight this with everything that we have. So, people of Illinois, we need your help. Get out your cell phones. Record and narrate what you see. Put it on social media. Peacefully ask for badge numbers and identification. Speak up for your neighbors. We need to let the world know that this is happening and that we won't stand for it. I was surprised and pleased to see that a federal agent in New York was put on leave after he was caught throwing a woman to the ground. Good. Good. That would never have happened, though, if it wasn't on camera. So keep documenting. It could make a world of difference for someone, perhaps for all of us. I look forward to taking your questions, and right now I'd like to hand the microphone over to Mayor Brandon Johnson. Mayor.
Thank you, Governor, of course. Thank you, Governor, and good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I'm grateful to all of the elected leaders here, the community, business, and faith leaders that are joining us today. Many Chicagoans were shocked and appalled to see videos of heavily armed, masked federal agents in our streets yesterday. The reality is that this stunt has nothing to do with public safety. This is about politics, money, and power. The president is using his militarized force the exact way he intended. to advance his political goals. He wants to militarize our cities, whether that's through ICE or through the National Guard or United States Army or Armed Forces. He wants to provoke conflict so that he can use this as a pretext to send even more federal agents into our city. What we saw yesterday was an absolute disgrace. Families, visitors, everyday Chicagoans were out enjoying our city, and they were met with dozens of heavily armed federal agents aiming to strike fear in our communities. They targeted street vendors and construction workers, just trying to make an honest living. They made a little girl act as a translator as they took her family into custody. These are heartbreaking scenes that have nothing to do with making our city safer. My question to these masked, heavily armed individuals is simple. What could you possibly need an automatic weapon for? The only plausible explanation is that their aim is not to carry out their duties, but instead strike fear in our communities. If you are following the law, if you are in accordance with the Constitution, if you have a criminal warrant, then there is no reason to cover your face. This comes on the heels of the revelation that was reported on MSNBC that Tom Homan, the so-called border czar, accepted a $50,000 bribe from undercover FBI agents in exchange for lucrative detention center contracts. So let's call it what it is. Tom Homan sold out the American people for $50,000 in cash. And that's why I'm calling on the federal government to appoint an independent investigator to review every single contract in the city of Chicago, the county and the state, related to any ICE detention centers. The people have a right to know if these contracts are legitimate or if they were granted as a result of outright bribery and corruption. As of last week, 72% of those held in ICE detention have no criminal record. And of those with a criminal record, many are for traffic violations and misdemeanors. The Trump administration's detention campaign is not for public safety, it is for profit. More than 90% of the immigration detention centers are run by private and for-profit corporations. The Trump administration has already engaged in no-bid contracts with private prison contractors across the United States. Executives at private prison firms are calling this a gold rush, as their stocks have soared by as much as 80%. In May, the CEO of a private prison corporation told investors, and this is a quote, "Truly one of the most exciting periods in the history of the company." One company estimated that they could make as much as $400 million of taxpayer money per year from private detention. Another said that it could make as much as $1 billion in additional revenue. The two largest private prison corporations gave President Donald Trump at least $2.8 million for his re-election campaign. And this is the agency that Trump and Republicans just handed $170 billion, a blank check with little to no oversight. The money that Republicans gave to ICE is there's more funding given to ICE in this last budget that has been allocated for police departments at state and local governments in all 50 states, including the District of Columbia combined. Let me say that again. Trump gave his personal militarized force more money than all other local and state police funding combined. And the guy they put in charge of that funding was bought for $50,000 in cash. They are lining their own pockets and the pockets of the executives of small number corporations, to a small number of corporations. I've spoken with parents in Pilsen, Little Village, spoken to business owners on Devon Street, elders in Uptown who are too scared to take their children to school. They're losing business and they're too afraid to even attend church because of their legal status. They're afraid of the reckless actions that they have seen. This is not being tough or patriotic. To throw a crying mother to the floor who just wanted to be reunited with her children, it's abominable. It's not law and order to body slam a 79-year-old business owner, an American citizen, for trying to produce the papers of his employees. And there's nothing brave about firing pepper bullets with chemical agents at a Chicago CBS reporter for simply showing up to do her job. Greg Bovino, who spends countless taxpayer dollars on TikTok videos of himself, was in charge of the operation in Los Angeles, where a 15-year-old kid, an American citizen with disabilities, was handcuffed and held at gunpoint by ICE. His family is now suing. By the time this is over, there will be hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer dollars wasted in settlements related to the excessive use of force and the unconstitutional actions of this administration. So again, let's make this very clear. This is not about public safety. This is not even about immigration. This is the continuation of the Trump administration's war on the poor. They have cut food assistance. They have cut Medicaid. They have cut violence prevention funding. They have made life harder and more dangerous for poor and working people across this country. They have declared war on poor on behalf of the ultra-rich. And so they can simply funnel our tax dollars to a small handful of billionaires. So we have to make sure that we continue to show our support for the people of this city, for this country. In closing, at a time when we are cutting hundreds of millions of dollars from healthcare, public health, housing, and defunding public education, manufacturing austerity, say that plainly, the Trump administration is worsening poverty at the same time as declaring war on the poor. This is an untrustworthy, corrupt, and out-of-control administration that is doing everything in their power to foment chaos in our cities. Whether it's in Portland, Los Angeles, or Chicago, we cannot accept the militarization of our cities. We will continue to stand united as a city, as a county, as a state, and local villages to reject any attempts to militarize our cities. I want to be very clear, what we saw this Sunday is not unique. As the governor has indicated, this is happening in villages like Broadview and other places across this country. And so we have to make sure that this is not the last time we express our unified voice to ensure that we protect the interests of all people. And with that, I will turn it over to our Attorney General, Kwame Raoul.
Thank you, Mayor. Governor, thanks for convening us. From masked federal agents using tear gas against people exercising their First Amendment rights in Broadview, to mask uniformed federal agents carrying automatic rifles as they menace people in downtown Chicago. In downtown Chicago, which is well patrolled by both the Chicago Police Department and the Cook County Sheriff's Office. The images we have seen in Chicago area look more like a region under siege than they do America in peacetime. If it was not clear from before, it should be plain now. The president's goal is to sow chaos, instill fear in Chicagoans and the American people at large. It's also clear that this has never been about fighting crime. Let me state clearly, I am not averse to the President of the United States wanting to be helpful in fighting crime in American cities. I'm not averse to federal law enforcement agencies contributing to fighting crime in American cities. In fact, we have had a great history of collaboration with those federal law enforcement agencies that are trained to fight crimes on the local level. However, if the president were sincere about fighting crime, he would devote more resources to those federal law enforcement agencies with whom we have partnered with, which we have had a great working relationship with, instead of either cutting their budgets or reassigning their agents to doing immigration work instead of crime-fighting work. He would not be cutting funding from community violence interruption. He would not be depriving victims of crime of the resources they need based on unrelated immigration criteria. Instead, he's federalizing the state of Oregon's National Guard. And as the governor laid out, he's following the same pattern that he followed in Oregon, and we just received a memo. Same steps that were followed in Oregon. The mobilization of the military isn't just an ineffective strategy to address crime. It is illegal. That is why I stand in solidarity with my colleague, Oregon Attorney General Dan Rayfield. We've been in contact over the weekend as well as earlier this morning, who filed lawsuit yesterday against the Trump administration's mobilization of the National Guard there. The 10th Amendment preserves states' sovereignty to enforce state laws as they see fit. The Posse Comitatus Act, as I've stated before, limits the federal government's ability to use the military for domestic law enforcement. A judge in California recognized that fact earlier this month. And the militia clauses of the United States Constitution give Congress sole authority to decide what factual circumstances allow the president to federalize the National Guard. They don't exist here. The president has failed to establish that any of the legal prerequisites exist for his efforts to federalize the Guard. Which is why litigation challenging these efforts is now pending in multiple courts. And if the evidence follows, if the pattern follows what we've seen in Oregon, he should expect a legal challenge here as well. As a matter of fact, this afternoon, we're filing a lawsuit challenging the administration's unlawful reallocation of more than $100 million in public safety and disaster relief funds away from Illinois and other states around the country. These funds, under the Homeland Security Grant Program, help states protect against acts of terrorism and are a critical source of money for networks of police departments, fire departments, emergency services, and public works departments across the country. In this latest action by the administration, the cut to Illinois funds alone is over $30 million. None of this chaos and none of these acts make us safer. To be clear, our U.S. Constitution is still the law of the land. It is generally unlawful for people to be subject to detention or search without probable cause or reasonable suspicion to believe that a crime has been committed. Due process is still required when someone is deprived of their liberty. The First Amendment still protects the right to free speech and peaceably and lawfully assemble, which includes the right to express one's views, even if those views are critical of government policies and how they're being carried out. That said, it is important to note that protesters must also comply with applicable laws. For example, the First Amendment does not allow for protesters to assault, intimidate, interfere with an officer of the United States government or local government while they are engaged in their performance, or to obstruct or impede federal civil immigration vehicles or enforcement operation. Clearly, this deployment of the federal officers into our well-policed central business district is meant to provoke Chicagoans. What the president is hoping to do is foment chaos by inciting out-of-control protests. So I urge Illinoisans, don't take the bait. There is no emergency in Chicago. Don't help him create one. Exercise your First Amendment rights, but do so peacefully, without violence or destruction of property. If you see what you believe to be civil rights being violated, use your phone or camera to document it, to bear witness. My office is monitoring these images, and so are legal and civil rights organizations around the city, the state, and the nation. I'm here to say that no president can flout the Constitution. The rule of law matters in the state of Illinois, and we will not hesitate to preserve it. This time I'd like to pass the mic to County Board President Tony Pretman.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I want to thank you all for being here today and for showing your support. My county, Cook County, is home to more than 5 million people, many of whom are immigrants who came here seeking a better life for themselves and their families. Yet today, many of our friends, families, and neighbors no longer feel safe at home, at work, or in public spaces. Federal decisions to militarize ICE activity have set a dangerous precedent. ICE agents are wearing masks, breaking into homes, and carrying weapons in downtown areas. These actions have created fear and chaos across our region and are designed to intimidate our residents. ICE agents have fired tear gas, pepper spray, and rubber bullets at protesters and journalists in Broadview. In Chicago, agents...
All right, you're just listening in there to officials in Chicago talking about the deployment of federal officials and ICE agents on the ground. Let's quickly shift gears. After a meeting between Trump and Democratic lawmakers on a looming government shutdown, let's listen in. Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries at the mic.
Their ability to undo whatever budget we agree to through rescissions and through impoundment, as well as pocket rescissions. And I think for the first time, the president heard our objections and heard why we needed a